"Open it," Daniel shouted from the driver's seat, his voice cracking over the rain. "Your bag is in the trunk. Hurry, Claire." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the lock. Blood was already soaking through the thin gray sweatpants I had pulled on in a panic, and every cramp that hit me made the parking lot tilt under my feet. The emergency room doors were 20 steps away. 20 steps. But Daniel had forgotten my insurance card, my phone, everything, and he kept yelling that it was all in the back. So I lifted the trunk. And there, under a blanket curled between two plastic storage bins, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7. Dark hair stuck to her damp cheeks. A stuffed rabbit was crushed against her chest. Her eyes flew open the second the trunk lifted, and when she saw me, she flinched so hard she hit her head against the side of the car. Then she whispered in a terrified little voice I still hear in my sleep, "Please don't send me back to Richard." I stopped breathing. Behind me, Daniel slammed his car door and ran toward us. The second he saw that I had found her, the color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a sheet over him. "Claire," he said too quickly. "Close the trunk." I stared at him. "Who is she?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And that was the moment I knew whatever was dying between us had already been dead for a long time. But that wasn't the worst part. A nurse rushed out with a wheelchair asking if I was the one bleeding. Daniel reached for me, but I stepped back so fast pain shot through my stomach. The little girl in the trunk had gone completely still, clutching that rabbit so tightly her knuckles were white. Daniel looked at me, then at her, like he was about to lose both of us at once. "Get her inside," the nurse snapped. Yow. I should have gone straight through those sliding glass doors. I should have let the doctors handle me and let Daniel explain whatever nightmare I had just opened with that trunk. But I couldn't move. I kept looking from that child to my husband, searching for one expression that made sense. I found none. So the nurse grabbed my arm and wheeled me inside while rain hit the pavement so hard it sounded like applause. 3 years of trying for a baby had made me familiar with pain in ways I used to think happened only to other women. There was the sharp pain of injections, the slow ache of failed hope, the quiet pain of smiling at baby showers with a wrapped gift in your lap while your own body kept disappointing you. Daniel used to hold me through all of it. He used to cry with me. He used to say, "We're still a family even if it's just us." Then, somewhere after the second miscarriage and before the last round of IVF, he changed. He guarded his phone. He kept his car locked. He started taking long drives at night and coming back with excuses that were always just believable enough to make me feel stupid for doubting him. I told myself grief was doing this to us. I told myself men broke differently. I told myself marriage meant staying through the dark part. But lying on that hospital bed with blood drying cold on my skin, all I could think was this: my husband had a child in his trunk. And then everything changed. The doctor came in 20 minutes later with the face doctors where when they already know you're going to cry. The pregnancy hadn't taken. What I was feeling wasn't the start of life. It was the end of another hope my body couldn't hold. I nodded like I understood. I even thanked him. By then I had become an expert in receiving devastation politely. But when he left and the room went quiet, all the strength I had used to sit there and act civilized drained out of me. I folded forward and pressed both hands over my mouth so no one in the hallway would hear what grief actually sounds like. Daniel wasn't there. He had texted once. "Handling something. I'll explain soon." Handling something. I stared at those 2 words until my vision blurred. Then I laughed and it came out ugly. Somewhere in this building or outside it or maybe already gone, was a little girl who had looked at me with animal fear and begged me not to send her back to a man named Richard. And my husband thought the correct response was handling something. That's when I got out of bed. But I didn't know what was coming next. I found them in a family waiting room near the pediatric wing. Daniel was kneeling in front of her with a juice box and a packet of crackers. The little girl's sneakers didn't touch the floor. Her eyes were red, but she had stopped shaking. Daniel was speaking softly, the way he used to speak to me when I woke up crying after the second miscarriage. "You're safe," he was saying. "Just breathe, Ruby. One slow breath, okay? Ruby." He knew her name. I stepped into the doorway and both of them looked up. The little girl's face changed first. Confusion. Then fear. Then something else. Not guilt. Not surprise. More like she had heard about me and had expected someone crueler. Daniel stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Claire, you shouldn't be walking around. That's your opening?" I asked. "Really? Ruby shrank back into the chair and pulled her rabbit close again. On the cracked pink backpack at her feet, I saw a small inhaler clipped to the zipper and a keychain shaped like a yellow star. Everything about her looked temporary, rushed, grabbed in a hurry. Who is she? I asked again. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Not here. I looked at Ruby. Did he tell you to hide in the trunk? Her chin trembled. Daniel cut in fast. Claire. But Ruby answered anyway. He said Richard was outside the bus station, she whispered. He said if I stayed quiet he could get me away. The room went cold. What I saw next shocked me even more. Daniel turned to Ruby with pure panic in his eyes, as if the one thing he had been trying to hold together had just slipped through his hands. He looked back at me and lowered his voice. She's scared. Please. Not in front of her. Then stop lying in front of her, I said. For one long second nobody spoke. The vending machine buzzed against the wall. A TV in the corner played a cooking show with the captions on. Somewhere down the hall a child laughed and that sound felt so cruel I wanted to tear the room apart. Then Ruby reached into her backpack, pulled out a folded tissue and offered it to me. I hadn't even realized I was crying. Something in my chest cracked open right then, not because I forgave anyone but because this child, this terrified hidden child, still had enough softness left in her to comfort a stranger. I took the tissue. Thank you, I whispered. Daniel closed his eyes like that hurt him more than yelling would have. But that wasn't the worst part. He booked us into a cheap motel 10 minutes from the hospital. Not home. Not anywhere familiar. A motel with buzzing lights, stained curtains, and a front desk clerk who barely looked up when Daniel paid cash. I wanted to fight him on it, but he kept saying the same thing in a low, urgent voice. Just one night. We stay here one night and I'll tell you everything. Men always say that right before they tell you the version of the truth they think you can survive. Ruby sat on one of the beds, still wearing the same damp hoodie, while I stood by the window pretending I wasn't about to break. Daniel got her dry clothes from a duffel bag I had never seen before. That hurt too. Not just because he had packed for her. Because he had packed well. Socks. Medicine. A hairbrush. Coloring pages. He had prepared for her while I was still begging God for a child who kept not arriving. How long? I asked without turning around. Daniel answered too fast. A few weeks. I turned. You've known about her for a few weeks? His silence answered something bigger than my question. Ruby looked between us, scared again. Did I do something bad? No, baby, I said before I could stop myself. Baby. The word slipped out of me so naturally it made my throat burn. Daniel noticed. Ruby did too. Her small shoulders loosened a little. Then Daniel said, Ruby, can you watch cartoons in the bathroom for a minute? Just till the grown-ups talk. She obeyed too quickly. That told me more than I wanted to know about the kind of adults she had been surviving around. The bathroom door clicked shut. I faced my husband. Start, I said. He sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, both hands locked together like he was holding them back from shaking. Ruby's mother contacted me 6 weeks ago. Who is she? He looked at me. And in that tiny dirty motel room with blood still staining the inside of my sweatpants and the smell of bleach in the air, my whole body knew the answer 1 second before he said it. Nina. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my mind rejected it so completely that laughter was the only thing it had left. My sister Nina had been gone for 12 years. Gone from birthdays. Gone from funerals. Gone from every holiday where my mother's mouth tightened if anyone got too close to saying her name. Gone since she was 19 and I was 21 and everyone told me she had run off with the wrong people and ruined her life. You're sick, I said. I wish I was lying. No, I shook my head hard. No, Daniel. My sister disappeared. She didn't text my husband out of nowhere and hand him a child. His voice broke. She was dying, Claire. The room tilted. I gripped the dresser to stay standing. What? She was sick for a while. She found me through Mara. He swallowed. She said she didn't have anyone else she trusted. Mara. Daniel's older sister. The one who worked with at-risk families and always looked at people like she could see the part they were hiding. You're saying my missing sister found you, not me, because she trusted you more than she trusted her own family? Daniel looked away. That was answer enough. And then everything changed again. He told me Nina had been living 3 states away under a different last name. She had called him from a hospital. At first he hadn't even recognized her voice. She told him she had a daughter. She told him that if anything happened to her he had to get Ruby before a man named Richard did. She told him to come alone. She made me promise not to tell your mother, he said. "My mother?" I snapped. Why would she care? Daniel stared at the motel carpet. "Because Richard still sees your mother." A cold line ran down my spine. Richard. My mother's husband. My stepfather. I hadn't lived with them in years. I barely visited. But every Christmas he still carved the turkey with that fake cheerful smile. Every birthday he still hugged me too long. Every time I left their house I told myself the reason I felt sick around him was just old tension from a bad childhood. I heard the bathroom door creak. Ruby stood there holding the rabbit under her chin, her face pale. "Is Richard the tall man with gray hair?" she asked me softly. "The one in the picture in your wallet?" My knees almost gave out. Because there was a family photo in my wallet. And Richard was in it. What I saw next chilled me to the bone. Ruby nodded before I could answer. "That's him. Mommy said if he ever found me I should run." The world got very, very small after that. I sat on the edge of the bed because standing was no longer an option. Daniel moved toward me but I held up a hand and he stopped. Ruby stayed by the bathroom door, like she was ready to dart back inside if I raised my voice. My voice came out flat instead. "Explain every single thing. Right now." Daniel inhaled hard. "Before I met you, Nina and we knew each other." That sentence punched the air out of me. Knew each other how? He shut his eyes. "We dated. Briefly. Right before she disappeared." I stared at him. Of all the betrayals I had prepared myself for these past months, this one had never even crossed my mind. Not because it was impossible. Because it was grotesque. My missing sister. My husband. A past that had been sitting in my marriage like a trapdoor and I had never seen it. "How long have you been keeping that from me?" "Since the day we got serious," he said. I laughed again but now there was rage in it. "Wow. So only our entire marriage. It ended before you and I ever started." "That's not the point." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Ruby was watching us with wide, scared eyes. So I swallowed my scream. I forced it down until it felt like glass in my throat. Daniel kept talking and every word made me hate him more and understand him more, which was somehow worse. He said he had been 19. Nina had been reckless and brilliant and impossible not to love. They were together for a few months. Then she vanished. No goodbye. No explanation. He looked for her at first, but my mother told him Nina had left town with drugs and some older guy and wanted nothing to do with any of us. By the time he got close to me 2 years later, he had buried that whole part of his life under shame and confusion. "I should have told you," he said. "Every day after I married you, I knew I should have told you. But you didn't." "No." Ruby edged a step closer to me. "Are you mad at me?" That was the first time I realized children blame themselves for truths adults create. I opened my arms without thinking. She ran into them. But that wasn't the worst part. She was so light. That's what I remember. Not just that she fit against me as if she had always belonged there, but that she weighed almost nothing. Like nobody had been feeding her the kind of life a child should carry in her body. Her cheek pressed against my chest. Her breath came in quick, frightened bursts. I held her because I couldn't bear not to. Daniel stood there watching us and grief moved over his face in a way I couldn't read. "She knows?" I asked quietly, stroking Ruby's hair. "She knows I might be her father." "Might." That word dug in. "You don't know." Nina said she was sure. But I haven't done a test yet. I looked down at Ruby's dark eyes, dark like Nina's. My sister's face flashed through my memory so sharply it almost hurt. 19, sharp laugh, chipped black nail polish, the silver ring she wore on her thumb, the way she always stood between me and Richard when we were younger. I had spent 12 years convincing myself I remembered her wrong because everybody said she was trouble. Now her daughter was in my arms. And my husband might be the father. I didn't know what was coming next. Ruby fell asleep around midnight with the rabbit tucked under her chin and one hand fisted in the blanket beside me. Daniel sat in the chair by the door like a man waiting for a verdict. Neither of us had touched the other. The motel light from outside cut his face into hard, tired angles. "Why was she in the trunk?" I asked at last. He rubbed both hands over his face. "I picked her up from the bus station this afternoon. Nina's friend got her there. Ruby panicked when she saw Richard near the entrance. I don't know if he actually saw us or not. I just needed to get her out fast. Then you started bleeding in the car and You hid a child in the trunk while taking your wife to the hospital. His eyes filled. I know how that sounds. No, I said. I don't think you do. He nodded once like he deserved that. Then he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. Nina gave me this for you. My hands went numb. I didn't open it. Not then. I couldn't. There are some pains the body knows it has to approach sideways or it will stop functioning entirely. Instead I asked, how did she die? Daniel looked down. House fire. That's what the report said. That's what the report said? He met my eyes. Nina didn't believe it was an accident. She said if anything happened to her, I should assume Richard had found her. The room went silent except for the weak hum of the motel AC. Richard. I hadn't said his name aloud in years if I could help it. But now it was everywhere. In Ruby's fear. In Nina's warning. In the part of my own childhood I had spent my whole adult life trying not to examine too closely. And then everything changed again. At 3 in the morning, while Daniel slept in the chair and Ruby dreamed beside me, I opened her pink backpack looking for tissues. What I found instead was a folder. Inside it was a birth certificate. Ruby Elise Hart. Mother, Nina Hart. Father, Daniel Holloway. I thought my heart had already broken enough for one life. I was wrong. For a full minute I couldn't even breathe. I just stared at the paper until the letters doubled. Then I looked at Daniel asleep in that chair, mouth slightly open, face soft in a way I no longer believed, and I understood something terrible about betrayal. It is never one wound. It is 1,000 old wounds suddenly learning each other's names. I stood so fast the lamp shook. Wake up. Daniel jerked awake. What? I threw the birth certificate at him. It hit his chest and slid into his lap. He looked down. Then up at me. Ruby stirred in bed and murmured in her sleep. You told me you might be her father, I whispered. You let me hold her, comfort her, and look you in the face while you still lied. Claire. No. Don't say my name like I'm the one making this ugly. Is she yours? His silence lasted 1 second too long. That was all I needed. What I said next came from a place I didn't know I had. Get out of my sight before I forget there's a child in this room. But that wasn't the worst part. He didn't fight me. He just stood there holding that paper like it had cut him too and said in a low broken voice, I found out the same night you did. I wanted not to believe him. I wanted one clean villain. I wanted rage without complication. But something in his face stopped me. She never told you? I asked. He shook his head. Not until 6 weeks ago. Nina said she was afraid. She said after she left, Richard started looking for her. She didn't know who she could trust. She kept moving. She kept changing names. By the time Ruby was born, she decided it was safer if nobody knew. I crossed my arms hard over my chest. Except somehow she knew where you were. She found Mara first. Mara tracked me down. And you still didn't tell me. I wanted to, he said, voice cracking. Every day since I picked up that phone I wanted to. But you were in the middle of treatment and then Nina begged me not to tell anyone until Ruby was safe. And then you started bleeding tonight and everything fell apart at once. I laughed bitterly. You always do that. Do what? Decide what truth other people can handle. That landed. I saw it. Good. For the first time all night he didn't try to defend himself. He only said, you're right. Those 2 words should have helped. They didn't. I didn't know what was coming next. Morning came ugly and gray. Ruby woke up before either of us, dressed herself in the same jeans from yesterday, and sat on the floor coloring on the back of an old motel receipt. She had drawn a house on fire. When she noticed me looking she turned it over so fast my chest hurt. Did you sleep okay? I asked. He shrugged. Kids who have seen too much always shrug like that. Like feelings are luxuries for safer people. Daniel brought in pancakes from the diner next door. Ruby barely touched hers. I couldn't eat it all. We were still sitting in silence when someone knocked on the door. Daniel stiffened instantly. 3 soft knocks. Pause. 2 more. He exhaled. It's Mara. When he opened the door, his sister stepped in wearing jeans, a dark blazer, and the expression of a woman already tired of everyone else's mistakes. Mara was 50, sharp-eyed and impossible to charm. She took one look at my face, one look at Ruby, and put a file on the table. So, she said, I see we're past the lying stage. I almost liked her for that. Ruby ran to her first. Mara knelt and hugged her like this wasn't the first frightened child she had held together. Then she stood and looked straight at me. You deserve the full truth, she said. And we're out of time. My skin went cold. Why? She opened the file. Inside were printed emails, hospital forms, a death certificate, and a photo of Nina I almost couldn't look at because it was the first recent picture I had ever seen of my sister. She looked thinner, older, exhausted. But it was her. It was absolutely her. Mara pointed to one page. Richard filed emergency guardianship papers yesterday morning. I blinked. On Ruby. Yes. How? He's not her father. No, Mara said. But according to these documents, he's claiming Nina named him temporary guardian before she died. Daniel swore under his breath. Mara slid another paper across the table. The signature line looked wrong. Even I could see that. Forged? I asked. Mara nodded. Likely. But until we challenge it, it still creates danger. If he gets in front of the wrong judge first, he could make a legal mess out of this before DNA results come back. Ruby stared at us from the bed, clutching her rabbit again. Am I going back? No, I said immediately. Came out stronger than I felt. Mara looked at me for a long second like she was measuring whether I meant it. I did. And then everything changed. We spent the next 2 hours in Mara's office downtown. She specialized in family cases involving kids who had nowhere safe to land, which suddenly felt less like a profession and more like a prophecy. Ruby sat beside me drawing circles while Mara laid out the truth in pieces. Nina had reached out to Mara first because she had seen an article online years ago about Mara helping runaway teens. Nina remembered her from when Daniel and I got engaged. She had followed our lives from a distance. She knew I had married Daniel. She knew about the miscarriages. She knew my mother still posted family holiday photos online with Richard smiling in the background. She didn't contact Claire because she thought Claire hated her, Mara said quietly. That sentence hit harder than all the others. My throat tightened. Why would she think that? Mara looked at Daniel. Daniel looked sick. Finally he said, because your mother told her you believed she ruined everything. My chair scraped the floor. My mother spoke to her? Years ago, he said. Once. Nina tried to come back when Ruby was a baby. He called the house. Your mother answered. She told Nina not to contact you again unless she wanted Richard to find her. I couldn't speak. All those holidays. All those years. Every time my mother cried and said she missed Nina but didn't know where she was. But that wasn't the worst part. Mara leaned forward and lowered her voice. There's something else Nina left. She took the stuffed rabbit from Ruby as gently as if it were made of glass. Ruby protested, but Mara squeezed her shoulder and said, just for 1 minute, sweetheart. From a seam near the bottom she pulled out a tiny flash drive. My stomach dropped. Nina told me Richard wanted this more than he wanted anything, Mara said. She wouldn't say why over the phone. Just that if he ever got close to Ruby, it meant he was desperate. Daniel looked stunned. You didn't tell me about that. Because you were already drowning, Mara said. And because Nina asked me to wait until Claire was present. I whispered, why me? Mara met my eyes. Because whatever's on this belongs to your family. No, that wasn't right. Nothing about Richard had ever belonged in the word family. I didn't know what was coming next. The video started with static. Then Nina's face filled the screen. I made a sound I didn't know a human could make. She was sitting on a motel bed, hair tied back, skin pale, one side of her mouth bruised yellow like it had been healing. She looked straight into the camera and for 1 second it felt like she was looking straight into me. Claire, she said, and I broke. I hadn't heard my sister's voice in 12 years. Mara paused the video but I grabbed her wrist. No. Play it. So she did. Nina said if I was watching it meant one of two things had happened. She was dead or Richard had found Ruby. Maybe both. She said there were truths she had buried because burying them had once felt like survival. She said she was done surviving that way. Then she said Richard had been hurting her since she was 14. I stopped hearing the room for a moment. Not because I didn't understand. Because some part of me had always understood and spent years refusing to translate it. Nina kept talking. He said our mother knew. Not at first but soon enough. She found out and chose denial because she was afraid of losing the house, the money, the life Richard gave her. Nina said when she tried to protect me, Richard turned on me too. Not as far. Not as often. Because Nina kept stepping in. Because she made herself louder, harder, more difficult to control. I started shaking. Fragments came back then. Doors locking. Nina sleeping on my bedroom floor when I was sick. Richard's hand on my shoulder lingering too long. My mother telling me I was dramatic, oversensitive, always remembering things wrong. Nina looked into the camera and cried only once, but that one tear undid me. I left because he told me the next time I interfered, he'd start with Claire. The room blurred. What I saw next destroyed whatever was left of the old me. Nina said she had tried to take me with her. I had no memory of that. She said she packed a bag for both of us the night she ran. But when she came to my room, I was asleep with a fever, and our mother was sitting beside me. Richard was in the hallway. Nina knew if she tried then he would stop her. So she left alone, believing she would come back with help. She never got the chance. Richard reported her as unstable. Our mother backed him. By the time Nina tried to reach out again, every official version of her life had already been twisted into the story we were all forced to live with. Then Nina said something that made Daniel turn away and cover his face. Daniel believed me. He was the only one back then who almost did something. I told him to stay away because I was afraid Richard would hurt him too. Almost. That word gutted him. I could see it. Gutted me too. Years of silence. Years of fear. Years where the people who should have protected us protected themselves instead. Nina took a breath and glanced off camera, probably toward Ruby. If Daniel is watching this, tell him Ruby is his. I should have said it years ago. I was selfish and scared and convinced love only gave dangerous men more ways to find you. I'm sorry. Ruby had climbed into my lap by then without me noticing. She stared at the screen with solemn eyes. Is that my mommy? She asked. Yes, I whispered. She looks like you. That did it. I started crying so hard I could barely see the rest of the video. But that wasn't the end. At the end, Nina looked directly into the camera and said one final thing. Claire, if you're hearing my voice after all this time, don't let them make you doubt yourself again. And then the screen went black. Nobody in the room spoke for a long time. I didn't know what was coming next. I wish I could say anger made me clear-headed. It didn't. It made me dangerous and shaking and so full of old grief that I thought I might split open with it. I wanted to drive straight to my mother's house. I wanted to throw that flash drive on her kitchen table and make her explain 12 stolen years. Mara stopped me at the door. That's exactly what Richard wants, she said. I turned on her. You don't get to tell me how to react. No, she said evenly. But I do get to tell you strategy. If Richard knows we have that video, he'll either run or get desperate. Both are bad for Ruby. Daniel stepped between us, not touching me, just there. Mara's right. I stared at him with all the rage I still had left. Don't. He nodded once and stepped back. Good. We filed emergency paperwork that afternoon. Temporary protection. DNA petition. Challenge to the forged guardianship. Mara moved fast, but courts move like old people through water, and every minute that passed felt like something sharp against Ruby's throat. By evening my mother had called 9 times. I finally answered on the 10th. Claire, she said, all breathless concern. Richard says Daniel has dragged some poor child into your mess. What is going on? My body went still. Not hello. Not are you okay after the hospital. Just that. I looked at Ruby coloring at the table. Daniel was across the room, jaw tight, pretending not to listen. You know exactly what's going on, I said. Silence. Then my mother's voice hardened in a way I hadn't heard since childhood. Be very careful what you think you know. I nearly laughed. All my life she had mistaken my silence for blindness. I know Nina called you, I said. I know you told her to stay away. I know about Richard. The line went so quiet I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then my mother whispered, you should not be discussing private family matters in front of outsiders. Outsiders. That's what she called Truth when it entered the room. I said, Ruby is not going with him. My mother exhaled sharply. That child belongs with her family. I looked at Ruby again. For once in your life, try telling the truth. And I hung up. And then everything changed. That night someone tried the motel door. Not a knock. The handle. Once. Twice. Fully. Ruby was asleep with her head in my lap on the bed. Daniel and I both froze. Then he moved so fast I barely saw him reach the door and look through the peephole. Nobody there. Mara, who had insisted on staying in the room next door, came in with her phone already in her hand. The parking lot camera from the office showed a man in a baseball cap leaving the walkway, but the angle was bad. Could have been anyone, Daniel said. Mara didn't answer. Because we all knew it could not have been anyone. Ruby woke up crying 20 minutes later from a nightmare so bad she threw up on the motel comforter. While I cleaned her up, she clung to my wrist and sobbed. He found us, he found us, he found us. I held her face and said the words I wished somebody had said to Nina, to me, to every version of us that had spent years afraid. No, I told her. Not this time. This time we don't let him. She looked at me like she wanted to believe it but didn't know how. Honestly, neither did I. But that wasn't the worst part. The next morning the DNA lab called. Because of the emergency filing we had rushed the test. Daniel was Ruby's father. Officially. Legally. Undeniably. He sat down like his legs had stopped working. Mara took the paper and nodded once, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Ruby didn't fully understand, but when Daniel told her very softly, "It means I'm your dad," she only stared at him and asked, "Are you going to disappear too?" That question silenced all of us. Daniel dropped to his knees in front of her. "No," he said, and there was nothing fake in his voice now, nothing hidden. "I already failed you once without knowing it. I'm not doing that again." Ruby studied his face. Then she did something that made my own chest ache with jealousy and tenderness at the same time. She touched his cheek. Just once. Like she was checking whether he was real. I turned away because some griefs are too complicated to cry over in public. My husband had a daughter. My sister was dead. And somehow, instead of collapsing, I was the one holding everybody else up. I didn't know what was coming next. Came in the form of a police car. 2 officers arrived at Mara's office just before noon. One of them was young and nervous. The other was older, heavy-set, and had the kind of polite smile that never reaches the eyes. He asked for Daniel by full name. Then he asked where Ruby was. Mara stepped into lawyer mode so fast even the air around her changed. On what grounds? The older officer held up a copy of Richard's emergency guardianship order. Temporary approval. Ex parte. Signed an hour earlier by a judge in another county who had not yet seen our challenge. My stomach dropped. Richard had moved first. The officer said they were not there to remove Ruby yet, only to verify her location and welfare pending a hearing the next morning. But the message was clear. Richard was close. Much too close. After they left, Mara slammed her file shut. "He has help," Daniel said. "Inside the court? Maybe. Or just good timing. Doesn't matter. We're going to the hearing with everything." "Everything?" I asked. Mara looked at the flash drive. My pulse jumped. "You think we should use Nina's video already?" "I think if Richard pushed this hard this fast, he's scared of something bigger than custody." Daniel's face darkened. "The house." Mara and I both looked at him. He rubbed his jaw. "Nina mentioned a property once. Said Richard had transferred something through your mother years ago. I didn't understand it at the time." Mara swore softly. "Trust. It has to be a trust." That was the first time the final piece started sliding into place. Because Richard never did anything for one reason only. If he wanted Ruby, there was money in it. What I saw next made me sick. Mara pulled county records while we sat there. A family trust had been created 17 years earlier by my late grandmother. Half to my mother. Half in equal future shares to her daughters, Nina and me. If either daughter died, her share would pass to her living children. Ruby. Richard didn't want a granddaughter. He wanted access. My mother had helped him try to steal it. For a second the room turned red around the edges. Not because of the money itself. I would have burned every dollar to bring Nina back. But because greed was the reason they kept chasing her. The reason they threatened her. Maybe the reason she died. Mara looked at me carefully. "Claire." "I'm fine," I lied. I wasn't. I was done. And then everything changed for the last time. The hearing was set for 9 the next morning. At 7:30 my mother walked into Mara's office unannounced. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older too. But not older enough to deserve my pity. Richard wasn't with her. That alone made the room tense. Ruby was in the conference room with coloring books and Daniel was down the hall making copies. My mother stood there in a cream coat like she was arriving for brunch instead of stepping into the wreckage she had built. "Claire," she said softly. I didn't move. Mara came out of her office. "You need to leave." My mother ignored her. Her eyes stayed on me. "Please. I just want to talk." I laughed without humor. 12 years late. Tears filled her eyes. Maybe they were real. I honestly don't know. Some women cry because they're sad. Others cry because it used to work. "You don't understand everything," she whispered. "No," I said. "I understand plenty." She took a step forward. "Richard was good to us at first. After your father died, we were drowning. The bills, the mortgage." I held up a hand. "Don't you dare turn money into a reason." Her mouth trembled. "I was trying to keep a roof over your heads. And when he hurt Nina?" She shut her eyes. That silence was confession. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not rage. Not grief. Clarity. "You chose him," I said. "It wasn't that simple." "It always is." "No, Claire, you don't know what fear does to a woman." I stepped closer. "I know exactly what it does. Nina spent her whole life carrying yours.